Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is James Roberts. I am joined again this evening by John Gauger.
Thank you, James.
Today is May 7th.
The day after.
The day after the day of the town meeting. And this show is going to ask you a very simple question. Are you ready for a tax increase? Specifically, are you ready for a 23% tax increase? Are you ready for a 23% tax increase that follows the increases that you've already seen in your water and sewer rates, 20 and 35% respectively, which, as we discovered in last week's show, turned out to be rather closer to 30 and 50% respectively. And if you're a big customer, closer to 60 and 80% respectively. Paradoxically, we are looking at perhaps one of the largest tax increases ever proposed for Winsted, and yet this budget will still leave us millions of dollars short. This budget will still leave us unable to pay the bills. Are you ready, ladies and gentlemen, for a 23% tax increase that leaves us unable to pay our bills? That's the question for you this evening.
Yes, the mill rate is proposed last night to go to 31.2 mills. The equalization going from 25 to 30.2, plus a mill that, quote unquote, was going to be set aside to address the deficit. I brought this up last night. The deficit projected last night, we'll say, is between $2.8 million and $3.2 million. That is their numbers on their slide. The one mill represents, and we'll do it in round numbers, about $600,000, give or take some change. So you're looking at, much like the bridge repair that's going to take 7 years, if no one overruns their budget again, it's going to be 7 years before you pay down a deficit. So what does this do, ladies and gentlemen, is that you take the budget, you don't pay your bills towards the last 2 months of every pay cycle. That would be January and June. You take the bills and roll them over into the next year, like was done in the previous year, and then you start paying. But who gets paid? I mean, do you pay your medical benefits for your employees? Do you pay your pension benefits? This will only go on so long before the people that provide the services that aren't getting paid, such as Gilbert, say no.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear that this is a budget that makes no effort whatsoever to address, our most pressing problem. It is not just that we have a deficit, and a huge deficit at that, but we have a growing deficit. I mean, last year the deficit was 1.2. This year, we had been told it was going to be $3.2 million. Last night, we learned that the estimate has been reduced to 2.8. No one could tell us exactly why that was the case. The only specifics were offered actually had the town receiving less revenue rather than more revenue.
Let's go over a couple of things, and let's show how we got to the 1.2, okay? If you remember, when the present board came into office, they proposed settling the issue of underfunding a state mandate for the school systems. They looked at the fund balance that is supposed to be put away, and said, oh, well, we'll take the fund balance and we'll use that to fund the schools. However, the fund balance wasn't there. It was used, and we don't know because we don't have the audit, but we're proposing that it was used to pay the bonds. Etc. So what happened is, since the money wasn't there, the school went ahead and expended the funds, i.e., but the town didn't have the money to pay the vendors. The vendors never got paid. It was carried into this fiscal year, and you were paying $1.2 million worth of bills with this year's budget. And what happened is, in the first half-year cycle up to January, you saw Gilbert not being paid. You saw vendors not being paid. What you'll see in the last half of this year's cycle as the deficit grows is you will see vendors not being paid. The superintendent sent home a flyer stating millions in unpaid bills. The superintendent got a little note from the town manager and I think he was a little miffed that the town manager would question.
Secrets being revealed.
So he sent a note back to the town manager listing the first three letters of the alphabet of unpaid bills. Those unpaid bills are ACES, $4,822, American School for Deaf, $36,000, American School for Deaf, $25,000, Connecticut, $282,000.
And that's our health benefits, ladies and gentlemen, just so we're clear.
A variety of Junior Republic bills for $4,150 each, and he sums it up. And this is the superintendent's note. He says, so there's about $547,000 due on vendor representative of the first three letters of the alphabet. Add the list of invoices due from letters D to Z. Add out the outstanding pension liability, obligation to Gilbert and shared services, Hinsdale Door Project, and upcoming payrolls. That brings you to the total in the newsletter. Our community needs to know this. I'll forward the comprehensive list. So we're waiting for the comprehensive list, and we'll see if it, tallies the upwards of $2.8 to $3 million. But this is what's happening.
Right. So we started the year at 1.2. Because the budget that we have in our current year doesn't actually work, because many of the revenues in that budget are frankly made up, and because we've had some degree of overspending on some of our line items, that deficit has actually grown. And so we will end up the year with, our estimate has always been $2.5 to $3.5 million of deficit, the official number, as of last night, 2.8. Given that the budget doesn't restructure anything, one assumes it will continue to grow.
It'll grow.
And that's what we're signing up for here.
Now, let's look at last night's presentation. Last night's presentation focused very extensively on a collection rate between 97 and 98%. Now, I want you to do the math, but on a $20 million budget, the difference between 97% and 98% is 1%. So 1% of $20 million is $200,000. And when you add back in not delayed, but delinquent taxes and interest, that grows smaller. So to focus on that 1% on a collection rate difference between 97 and 98%, and spend all that time on a trivial issue, the fact of the matter is you're overrunning your line items on a regular basis, whether it's last year with the Board of Education overspending, or the year before with the Board of Education or this year with the overtime issues. You are blowing through budgets, and this is a management issue, and this management can't solve it.
Right.
I mean, they can record it, but they don't seem to be able to solve it.
And they keep trying to distract you with the details. Just as they distracted us last night with the tax collection rate, which is not a main driver of the growing deficit. They've tried to distract us all the way through with these irrelevant details about accounting irregularities or this, that, and the other, none of which have really contributed to the current year deficit.
Right.
There may be years past when clearly we expended cash to pay the town bonds. But that hasn't really happened this year. Now, we did get a couple of useful, very interesting acknowledgements, I thought, from the town manager last night. He did finally acknowledge that the bonds are indeed town obligations.
Yes, that's a general obligation fund bond.
And that correspondingly, Water and Sewer has never had any obligation to pay under those bonds. It's the first time we've heard anyone in a position of authority acknowledge what we have been arguing for the last 3 months.
And we're going to touch on a spot here now. He talked about revenues being unrealistic in past budgets. Let's talk a little bit about revenues being unrealistic in this budget. You touched on Water and Sewer. If you read the Waterbury Republican article and you looked at the finance director working with the Water and Sewer Commission, you'll see that the revenue put in this budget totals a little over $1 million and change. Okay, but when you look at how they compressed the expected revenue streams from Water and Sewer after the rate increase, I mean, they're compressed by $900,000 and change.
Right.
So I mean, it's a wash, and if you think you're going to get any revenue out of it, clearly you're mistaken.
Right now, it seems that water and sewer is both losing customers and existing customers are losing the ability to pay. I mean,
Exactly.
If you raise rates by, the advertised numbers of 20 and 35%, the real numbers of 30 and 50%, the potentially much higher numbers for larger, particularly the commercial customers, you're going to lose customers or people are not going to be able to pay. It's that simple.
Right. In the sewer department, the the firm that used that pumps the septic systems, that use the sewer department to dispose of the waste, which contributed upwards of 1/8 of the total revenue of the department, went elsewhere.
Right. I mean, they just, that customer just got up and walked away. Said, Winstead's too expensive. Can't do business in Winstead.
So,
But we did get useful acknowledgements last night. Again, the first one was the bonds. The second one was an acknowledgement that what they have been calling the deficit, the number that used to be 3.2 and is now 2.8, is only a portion of the deficit. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. They acknowledged last night that those numbers do not include, for example, the pension funds, which had been redirected from our pension fund. They do not include, or they suppose that money will be coming in from water and sewer to meet the last bond payment of this year.
and we'll see, because when you look at the FOI material that I FOI'd from the town since 10/1/2010 to present, the delinquent ratepayers that I saw just in water alone total
Have been
500.
growing. Right. The other thing they disclosed with respect to the deficit is that the $2.8 million is simply the cash shortfall at the end of the year. That does not include cash that was taken at the beginning of the year from those remaining fund balances sort of around town that we have yet to have any detail of. So the actual deficit number will have to be grossed up by that amount as well.
Yep.
So we are looking at a deficit here that is almost certainly going to be significantly greater than the 2.8 that people are talking about, and will quite likely be significantly greater than the 3.5 that we have been talking about.
So we're sitting here looking at this, and it's 5 to 8 mils easily, on top of the 23% increase that you've already received, going to 31.2
31.2. So
31.2 mils.
it's real. This is really a 40 mil budget.
This is a 40 mil budget.
If we were actually paying for the services the town manager is promising us, if we were paying the bills, past and present, this would be a 40+ mil budget.
Now, we saw all the policemen there to support the cause. We saw, a variety of teachers there. We saw the Gilbert School there. But you're going to have to understand that this budget doesn't generate enough revenue. Number one, the revenue items are very high. I mean,
Right.
There's an insurance payment of $600,000, approximately. I think it was $595,000.
$595,000.
There were revenues from the state that have since been decreased by, I think there's an $800,000 swing.
Yeah, and the legislature has told us we are not getting the same amount of money as we got last year, and yet the budget supposes we're going to get more. I mean,
And if you watch the selectmen meeting last night, they announced, the finance director announced that there was a decrease in this year's
state money for education,
state money for education. So I mean,
which apparently came as a great surprise to all concerned. There was one last acknowledgement last night, which was my favorite acknowledgement, and this was the acknowledgement that the money that is supposedly being put aside in the fund balance, the supposedly untouchable money that's going to cure our credit overnight, they actually intend to spend that. That's right, they have discovered the way to take the same dollar and use it in two different ways. To put it in the fund balance, in the lockbox, to lock it away, and then to give the key to Candy so she can open it back up and she can pay some bills. That's a miracle, ladies and gentlemen, using the same dollar twice. On that basis, we could reduce our taxes to $1 and just have the town manager use that $1 33 million times.
That's it.
It would save us a whole lot of heartache, and it would be a very simple referendum. This is just an example of the degree of lack of seriousness with which they are approaching this problem. Here in a public presentation with the TV cameras rolling, They are telling us, don't worry, ladies and gentlemen, the solution to your problem is we're simply going to take your tax dollars and spend each dollar 3 times. Well, that's how we got in this problem in the first place. Spending dollars 3 times over. Spending dollars that we didn't have. Spending dollars that didn't exist. And with a straight face, they tell us they're going to do the same thing again. Not by accident, not as a matter of extremis, not by necessity. They are planning to do the same thing again. And that's just wrong. That's just no way to run a railroad, ladies and gentlemen. So, where we started, the budget has a 23% tax increase. It still leaves us with our existing deficit.
Expanded deficit.
Which will grow between now and the end of the year, and then will grow again next year, because they haven't changed the way they've structured the services. And without changing the way you structure the services, by definition, you will continue to run the deficit.
And those that expect monies from the town better have bridge funding, because it is going to be longer periods of time. It's not going to start in November and end in January. It's going to start in October.
Because in the past, ladies, and it's important that you understand this, in the past when we've run these deficits, we've managed to cover them from the fund balance and from all the little bank accounts that we have in town. And so yes, we've run up debts to those funds, but at least we could pay those bills. Now we don't have any fund balance. We've spent all of that money. So when we have a deficit, we just don't pay the bill. That $3.2 million, $2.8 million, for whatever it may be, that represents people, you and I, employees, people who teach at the schools, not being paid.
That represents 10% of this year's budget.
That's an astonishing thing. When we are actually planning, we're putting a budget out there, we're planning, we're telling you in advance, approve this budget, and we are not going to pay people.
Yeah, I mean that. And to sit there and look at people, and you know, I mean, I put the question out there. Well, who's raising their hand not to be paid? Who's raising their hand not to have their insurance benefits? Who's raising their hand to you know, not have their pension funded?
Right.
I mean, you know, let's get all on a budget bandwagon, but you're going to have to make decisions, you know, if you're the police department. I mean, is your MRF-V not funded? Are your medical benefits not funded?
Are we not going to buy gas for the cruisers? We'll buy more bicycles instead?
You know, until the services are restructured, and I spoke to several people about this last night because they asked me, you're not going to close the deficit. You cannot go out there and pay the deficit off, which is going to be 5 to 7 mils, without restructuring the services and bringing the costs down. I mean, we understand that there is going to be some increase because you can't do it all one way or all the other. I mean, it's not all we're going to levy the tax and you're going to pay it, because you'll put the old town under.
Right.
I mean, there is just no more left in the real estate value there to do it. And people are questioning me on well, your reval analysis was wrong. It was dead right, because many of the houses that surround me are foreclosed properties, are abandoned properties, properties that went for $40,000, but they weren't included in the reval because of the state language saying that it had to be an arm's length transaction.
And let's just explore that for a minute. The reason that the state doesn't or hasn't historically included those things is they have been seen to be exceptional. In the past, if there was a foreclosure on your street, it was an unusual occurrence. Yeah. It was a family that had gone through a tough time, perhaps illness, perhaps the end of a marriage, perhaps the loss of a job. It was not a daily occurrence. In Winsted, in the last 18 months, foreclosures have become a daily occurrence. Downtown, foreclosures are the market. You can't look at any given street downtown and say, here's a willing buyer and seller, and here is a foreclosure. They're all driven by the foreclosure prices at this point. And so the notion that we are going to, quote unquote, take part of the market, but not all of the market, doesn't make sense.
I'll give you a for instance, okay? In my neighborhood, and I'll just say my little neighborhood of Bank Street, Hill Street, Mountain, in Oak for the time being, but I look at more than that. In that area, there were 2 newer houses on Mountain Avenue, both on half-acre plus plots. One sold for $110,000, one sold for $101,000. Both of them, and those were at arm's length transactions. Right. There were no houses that sold for more than $110,000. When you go and you look at my appraisal, my appraisal is way above that. When you look at the houses on my street, I mean, the house across the street was foreclosed for $40,000. They put an appraised price on that very high. But the sales price doesn't match it because it wasn't an arm's length transaction. So you have me now hemmed in by a bunch of foreclosed properties that are the market, and you're saying that in this, the average price went down, what, 16-18%?
Right.
And you're going to come out of this winding up paying more. I mean, that's the 23% increase.
Yeah, I mean, it's right there. And the idea that anyone thinks that is a reasonable outcome, whether it be at the state level, the town level, or at the individual level of you and I, is absurd. Everyone understands that the market is the market. You can't just say, we're going to exclude all sales from people called Smith to people called James. That's absurd. But that's exactly what actually happened. We excluded all sales that were foreclosures.
Yeah.
Just an arbitrary distinction that was drawn that skewed the numbers. But anyway, we digress. No one stood up to support the budget last night. It was noticeable. We had a significant audience. I would say that the audience was probably generally favorably disposed towards the budget. But interestingly enough, no one stood up to actually support it.
Yeah, and there's good reason, because if you support it and you're Gilbert, you're not getting paid. If you're a policeman and you support it, you're not getting paid, you're not getting your pension, you're not getting your MRF-B payments.
Right.
Somebody has to stand in line and say, I'm not going to do this because there's not enough money to go around to pay off the deficit.
Traditionally, when we're at this time of year, sitting at this table, telling you our thoughts on the budget, you have a whole line of people associated with the town who are thinking to themselves, if I vote yes, I am getting that pay increase, or I am preserving my job, or I am doing whatever it is that the budget is purporting to do. This time it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah.
Because those people are all facing the choice of, if I vote no, there may be cuts, and if I vote yes, I may not get paid. That's going to be a very interesting choice for the constituency that has always voted yes.
Now, my take on this is I am voting no. And the reason is that the revenues don't cover the expenses. They just don't.
Right.
I don't care how you cut it, which way you want to look at it, whether you're saying Dale is a savior and there's a $3 million deficit, and oh, by the way, we're going to pay $1 million to pay it down. You're generating a deficit, it's growing, and you have to gain control of that and shrink it.
It is irresponsible to do otherwise. The idea that we are actually going to budget to fail is absurd. Anyone who believes the purpose of a budget is to grow a deficit is coming from a different planet that you or I are coming from.
Yeah, we just don't have that accounting background.
And whether you say, gee, this is not the right time in the economic cycle to make the investments in town that clearly need to be made to reverse the grand list declines, to reverse what's happened downtown. Whether or not you believe that, you must surely believe that the budget actually has to pay its own bills. We have, as I said last night, we have the right as a community to decide how much services we want and to decide how much we want to spend. But we really don't have the right, ladies and gentlemen, to say to folks, you show up to work, you do your part, and we're not going to pay you. We really don't have the right to say, open your classrooms, and we're not going to give you the cash.
That's right.
We don't have the right to say to CLMP, keep the electricity coming, but by the way, we're not going to pay you. And it's not just that we're going to pay you out of some other place. We're just not going to pay you at all.
We're not going to pay you. When we run out of money, and that's going to be quickly, we're not going to pay you.
Yeah. That is what this budget is saying. This budget, the central premise of this budget is we are not going to pay our bills. Bills are for the little people. Bills are for other people. Bills are for other towns. Winstead doesn't pay bills. That's what you are being asked to ratify when it comes to this budget. And I don't think that we can look anyone straight in the eye with a straight face and say the right answer is for us as a strategy to decide not to pay our bills.
Yeah. So let's do some housekeeping here. The referendum is set for June 1st.
June 1st, Saturday.
June 1st, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. I'm going to go out on a limb here, but I didn't hear it at the meeting. I'm going to say Pearson School.
I assume so.
We're assuming if we get word from the registrars, we'll let you know, but we're assuming it's Pearson School. And go out and vote. If you have $1,000 worth of property, you are eligible to vote. You can vote absentee ballot. You can vote on the day if you're going to be here, but go vote. We're voting no. We don't believe the revenues. We don't believe the deficit is sustainable. We believe the deficit spending is sustainable. We believe that the deficit is growing and not being compressed. And there's no reason to go forward with this whatsoever.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to say good night. Once again, a 23% tax raise for a budget that actually leaves us with more unpaid bills than we started with.
Thank you.
Good night.